So today I'm counter-ranting a channel 10 times the size of mine. So it's not that I haven't taken on larger channels in the past. Of course I have. Now normally I only take a video, review it, give some advice, and close it up. However, this week I want to counter rant and go against the points that were made in this video. I do not agree with a lot of the things that this content creator said. I think they're harmful, I think it was a toxic message to put out, and I really wish they had gone back over their video and had listened to the points they had made and realized, hey, this is probably not the message I meant to put across. So I'm gonna go through this video bit by bit, the pieces that I really have a problem with, and just point out that this is not the message that we should be sending about self-inserts.
In the Mary Sue's video, I alluded a lot to self-inserts, and I talked a little bit on what a self-insert was and stuff like that, and I mentioned it with
So I guess my first question would be, why we're connecting Mary Sue's and self-inserts? Just because a character is a Mary Sue, that does not make it a self-insert. Just because a character is a self-insert does not make it a Mary Sue. I don't believe that self-inserts can even be Mary Sue's, for the simple fact that self-inserts are modeled after real people, and real people are not Mary Sue's. I don't make any connection between real people and Mary Sue's. Mary Sue's are very extreme character types, and they just do not live in the real world. Let's get that part of this point straight.
This is something, it's gonna be kind of weird, because I have a weird opinion on self-inserts. A lot of people are either just let people make self-inserts, it's not that big of a deal. And other people are like, no, they're the most horrible thing you could ever do in fiction ever, or non-fiction, or anything. And I'm weirdly on the fence about it, because I kind of have a bit of a both in mind.
See, the controversy around self-inserts is a bit void to me no matter what side of the fence you're on. Because a self-insert is when you take actual characteristics that exist in an actual person and you put them into a fictional character, dropping that character into a pre-existing fictional universe or one that you've created yourself. Where's the problem with this? You often get the critique that self-inserts are not realistic or good developed characters, yet these are real people that exist in real life. Now I understand the argument that these self-inserts may not fit the fictional universe that they've been dropped into. Yeah, obviously. If I exist in the real world, I'm probably not going to do very well in a fictional universe that, let's say, includes magic. However, a self-insert may never exist in a universe where they don't belong. They could be put into a setting where they work really well and you might never be able to tell they're a self-insert.
And it's purely contextual. In fact, something you'll find as I continue the series, whatever, is a very common phrase you're going to hear me say, is that context matters. And that it depends, and that anything can work in writing if done right. Or not writing, but just storytelling in general, in art, storytelling, anything. Anything can work if executed right.
That right there is exactly the point that I was just making. You can make a self-insert as long as you put them in the right context, in the right universe where they work. There's absolutely no problem. That's good storytelling. The problem that people have gotten with self-inserts over the years is that they've been put in the wrong context and in the wrong universes. Therefore, we've put a bad label on all self-inserts. What's wrong with writing a self-insert into a story that takes place in our actual physical universe? No problem. You exist in this universe, therefore you can fit in that story just fine.
You'll often see it more often in more fandom related stuff, which oftentimes self-inserts and Mary Sue's are thrown together in the same mixing bowl. However, these terms are not interchangeable. I just want to say that because a lot of people seem to think self-insert immediately equals Mary Sue, and a lot of people think, oh, they're a Mary Sue, they must be a self-insert, which is not always the case.
Thank you for doubling back to that point and making it very clear that Mary Sue's and self-inserts are not interchangeable terms. Now personally, if somebody wants to write themselves into a pre-existing fictional universe that they don't really belong in, I don't actually have a problem with this. We've all gone through a phase where we want to be a part of a world with magic or supernatural beings in it. If you haven't, you're lying. We've all wanted to be there. So if somebody wants to write a fan fiction where they're a part of this story, I have no problem with that. They're not hurting anybody. Fan fiction is for you. When you write fan fiction, it's for you. It's what you want to do. It's what you want to happen. You want to be a part of that story. That's all fine. I don't think that we should be getting up against people for that.
What's also really funny, though, too, is I see a lot of people who bash and shame upon self-inserts and think they're terrible, and yet seem totally fine or even have their own persona.
See, I don't want to lump up personas and self-inserts because the self-insert is you. Everything about you, your complete physical, mental, emotional, spiritual form placed into a story. Whereas a persona could be something completely different from what you are, but you still consider them a representation of yourself into a story that you're writing, or a story that you're telling, or a fan fiction that you've inserted them into. I don't want to lump them together because they are separate ideas.
A persona is basically, you'll typically find it amongst artists, is a character of some kind that is meant to represent themselves.
But they don't have to be exactly like the person is in real life. They can have a different physical form. They can have powers. They can have a different personality. But as long as that character identifies with them in some way, then it can be a persona. Versus the self-insert where it has to be completely you or somebody that you know. You can't change anything about a self-insert or it's not a self-insert anymore. There's a very distinct line between the two terms.
There's also like personas within fandoms as well. For example, you have like in My Little Pony, you can have your pony sona. In flippin' fur with furries, you can have a fur sona.
See, this is where you broke down your own argument. Because if somebody has a pony sona or a fur sona, it cannot be a self-insert. That's a persona by definition. It's a representation of you as something else or as someone else. A self-insert has to be a human being that has your chemical makeup. It has to be you. Otherwise, it's a persona. There's the line.
Now that I've just explained that to you, do they not sound very similar? In all honesty, they're both projections of the author into a character that in a sense is cooler than them in a way, you know?
No, I don't know. Sure, a persona could be a cooler version of yourself. However, a self-insert has to be exactly what you are or it becomes a persona.
If you go look around and you find everyone's personas, do the personas ever look exactly like the actual person? In all honesty, like...
Why would you try to make that point when you've already said that personas can include things like pony sonas and fur sonas? Those are animals. There's no possible way for those types of characters to look like the person who made them.
There are some people who do kind of use more of just themselves, but most of the time you'll find people, but they don't call that their persona, they just call that themselves.
In which case, that's a self-insert. But there's no reason to lump up personas and everything that classifies under that as self-inserts.
Aren't personas literally just self-inserts?
No.
My stance on self-inserts are kind of wishy-washy in a sense. It very much depends, because I think self-inserts are harmless, really. Because I think from a legitimate writing standpoint, the only time a self-insert is good is when you don't even know it's a self-insert.
I would love to have the criteria for sniffing out self-inserts explained to me, because I have yet to identify one all on my own.
Because it's such an interesting and compelling character.
So I guess average people can't make good self-inserts, even though most of us are average people living average lives, doing average things with average jobs, with average families, and so on and so forth. Like, what do you have to be? Like a super important or like super charismatic character or something to make a good self-insert? Like, you gotta elaborate a little bit on that, because now, what kind of people make good self-inserts where you can't tell they're good self-inserts? But hey, I don't even know how to tell a self-insert anyway, so maybe I shouldn't be talking.
That you'd never even know unless you were like very personal friends and knew the creator personally.
Is there any other way to tell if a character is a self-insert other than to know the creator personally and say, oh yeah, that's you for sure? Like, somebody needs to explain to me how to identify these characters if you don't know the person they're based off.
In fact, the moment you can tell a character is a self-insert without being told it is, then we have a problem.
As far as I can tell, the only two ways to tell a self-insert is if you are told it's a self-insert, or if you know the creator well enough that you realize that that is them 110%. So how exactly are you going to be able to tell if a character is a self-insert if you don't have either one of these scenarios in place? I don't understand. Somebody needs to explain this to me. I clearly have no idea what I'm talking about.
But from a legitimate writing standpoint, to me, self-inserts are a very bad thing to lean on.
Sure, if you're dropping them down into a universe where they don't belong. Remember your first point. Context matters.
That's not to say basing a character off of yourself or people in your life is a bad thing, because it's not.
I wish you would stay on one side of the fence or the other. I understand that your opinion is conflicted. However, this is really confusing. Having the opportunity in my life to have talked to several published artists who are fairly successful in both children's writing and more mature writing, I have the ability to say that I've been given the advice myself directly to me that if I wanted to write good stories and characters, to look at real life. This is why I have absolutely no problem with self-inserts in the right context.
A good writer can know how to realize their own flaws, or be willing not to stick so strictly that it must be them or it must be this person they're basing it off of.
Yep. But you can still take inspiration from real people in the real world to create characters for your own fictional universe or the story that you're writing. It really doesn't matter. However, it's important to remember that it's safe and okay to take inspiration from the real world and from people that you actually know.
So a skilled writer can really make that kind of stuff work.
So people who are good at it can do it well. Yeah, I guess so. That makes sense. That's usually how things work.
A very common trend I see amongst self-inserts is that very often they're just boring.
Youch. That was harsh. See, my biggest problem, and you'll hear me talk about this stuff in so many of my videos, is that you can't please people in this community. If you make a really great character, like they are great, in their universe, they are the center of attention. You get pegged for a Mary Sue because, hey, they're a bit too perfect or they're a bit too popular. If you make a character that really gets shit on in life and, you know what, they are down on their luck, hey, that's an anti-Sue. Hey, that character's too edgy. Fix him up. If you make a vanilla character that could exist in this real world, you're too boring. Spice up your character. Like, come on, you can't please people.
You know, they're just, or not even just boring, but just not as interesting as other characters in whatever narrative that they're in.
Self-inserts, by definition, are real people. Real mashups of personality traits coming together to make a real human being that lives a real life. So, if they're a boring character, quote unquote, that's just the luck of the draw. And
again, it goes back to, like, the most interesting characters, if they're self-insert, you're not gonna know. While as opposed to like a really flat character, you're typically kind of gotta figure it out, you know?
Why? Because real people are flat by definition and by nature? I'm not really picking up on your points here, because you're saying that real people translated into character design become boring and not as fun as characters that could be self-inserts but you don't know? Basically what you're saying is people with interesting personalities, quote unquote, big time there, I'm not offending anybody, make better self-inserts than people who live average lives. So how many self-inserts could possibly become actual interesting characters by your definitions, not mine?
For some reason, a lot of self-inserts I find, they just don't pique my interest that much. And it's not because they're a self-insert.
Yes, it is.
But it's just because they seem boring to me, and I don't know why.
So are real people boring as well, since, you know, self-inserts are technically real people? I'm not sure if this is the exact argument you should have been making against or for self-inserts. I don't even know what side of the fence you're on anymore, to be completely honest.
There's just like something about them that just feels like they're missing something.
Oh my gosh, are you serious? Real people seem to be missing something. Why would you say something like that? Why would you say any self-insert is missing something? I feel like that's not, I don't know, I'm like so speechless right now.
For a lot of them, not all of them, of course. There are a lot of self-insert characters I find that are just like any other character, and they're compelling and interesting.
And we're back on the only interesting people in real life can make interesting self-inserts points.
Same thing with like, and this goes for personas as well, because because if you couldn't tell, I kind of consider personas and self-inserts kind of on the same level here.
But they're not even close to the same thing.
You try creating characters and relating to them, relating with people that you basically make up. As weird as that sounds. As crazy as that sounds too, but you know.
So basically make personas, is what you're saying.
Let me just take a step back too. If you're writing a legitimate story and you want your character to be to self-insert, I don't recommend it. But if you want to, like you really want to, and that's what's going to be fun for you, do it.
Why on earth didn't you open with this? Do it for fun. There, that's it. That should have been the video. If you want to make self-inserts for fun, do it. End video.
To me, and again, this could be a totally personal thing, but self-inserts to me, just to relate this back, self-inserts to me, you have a lot of limits.
Why would you say something like that after making a really good point? Look, why would you say that real people are limited? That making characters based on real people are limited. That means that everybody is limited as to what they can and cannot be. You are limited to what you can and cannot do. I cannot fly, I do not have wings. However, I can soar when it comes to my overall potential. Don't limit people. Don't tell them that their character is limited and they need to be in a box.
Because if you're trying to make them like yourself, then you can only really do so much.
Damn it, why didn't you cut this out of your video? When you listen to this back, how could you not tell that this part of your message was actually harmful to people? Self-inserts are real freaking people. Real people with actual personality mashups. You can't tell them they're limited. Oh my god.
Because you have to figure out your own weaknesses and your own flaws. But you can't really go beyond that.
What? People can't, build themselves up on their strengths and work around and conquer their weaknesses? That's what character development is, and it applies to the real world as it does to fictional characters. What are you even trying to accomplish right now?
When you make up people and you just make people that are just, they don't exist, you just make them, you have so much more room to do whatever you want.
Yeah, sure, you can make ideal people, quote unquote, people who are successful, or people that are super charismatic or super likable. But are those super real people? No, they're so superficial. The characters you are describing right now are the type of characters that people would consider Mary Sue's or too over the top. Back off, get off this topic. This should never have been in your video. Oh my god.
You don't have to keep it like yourself, and you don't have to rely so strictly on yourself to make the character interesting.
People are interesting in their own unique ways. You can't just say that the majority of average people are boring and therefore make bad characters. Everybody has something about them that's unique, quirky, or special, and they can be liked or disliked for those specific traits by different people depending on the interactions and the character traits of the people that they are surrounded by. Context and environment, they're important.
Not boring because you yourself are boring.
No, that's exactly what you're saying. Yes, because you yourself are boring.
But boring because you can't exaggerate as much.
Everybody is special in their own little way. They have their own little quirk that makes their personality special compared to people with similar characteristics to them. Now, Depending on who they're interacting with or the environment they're in or whether or not they're comfortable with their surroundings, these personality traits can come out in different ways and therefore can be exaggerated or nulled depending on the context that's being used. Just because they're a self-insert or because the person doesn't have an overly exaggerated personality all on their own doesn't mean that they can't be interesting. You started off this video so strong and making legitimate points about self-inserts and character development, yet you ended up in such a terrible, terrible place. And I don't understand how we even ended up here. How did we end up with self-inserts being poorly developed, bad, boring characters that are missing something? I just feel so bad for anybody out there with a self-insert character that heard that. Because now they have to wonder, am I missing something? Is something about my personality not fulfilling to the people that I know in real life? Yes, they are going to feel that way. I would feel that way if I had a self-insert character and somebody said those harsh things about them. I wish you had taken the time to go back over your video and evaluate each of your points, because I'm sure you would have seen that what you had said in the second half of your video was not necessary and could potentially hurt people. You are an excellent content creator. My only advice to you is to look back over every point you make in a video before you upload it and make sure you can stand behind it 100%. If not, take it out in the future. And of course, while we're looking at today's featured fan art, I would just like to remind you that common sense is important and you shouldn't be finding anybody I talk about in my videos and harming them in any way. I do not condone that. Thanks for coming back another week, guys. If you're new, be sure to check out another video. There's a great one here on the left, last week's here on the right. Check out the Discord server. We're having a lot of fun over there. Maybe become a Patreon, keep this content going. Like this video, leave some comments. I love to read them and I respond to most of them. As always, guys, have a wonderful day and see you guys next time.